Yeah, sorry about the tardiness. I had a little bit of difficulty getting in, but
Oh, okay. I was worried you were in our classroom, so I jumped into the another classroom to make sure you're not there, and then I jumped back.
yeah, this one had me put my name in again, but I or for the first time, but I kept thinking I was clicking the wrong link or something, so I just
Oh, okay.
my fault. But yeah,
No. Um, Ethan and Songming, when you're ready, when you're presentable, can you show your faces to all of us?
Yeah, I'll have to switch the computer that I'm on though. This one doesn't have a webcam.
Sure. That's okay. Um, Robin, I will give the floor to you, like I say this morning, and we can
sure.
start.
Oh, well, thank you, Dr. Trump, for having me on. And just so your students are aware, earlier this morning we spoke to another class. Had just an amazing conversation. I was very impressed, and y'all have a really great teacher who I just met, but comes very well. Reference from my boss actually, U.S Tran. So I work at the George H.W. Bush Foundation for U.S. China Relations, where I serve as the director for business programs and corporate affairs. I believe you all have my official background information, so I won't go too much into that. But one thing just to share is I know you may be looking at the background, go, where is this guy right now? Got various things hanging on the wall there, and that's something that was asked earlier. So just to address that, I actually typically am in Dallas, Texas, but due to COVID, I am officing out of our family's ranch, which is out in Harper, Texas, in the Hill Country, and I am a fifth generation cattle rancher. Along with the work that I do at the Bush China Foundation, I have my own herd that I've started out of my parents' herd, and so out here I'm doing both at the same time. In the evenings, cattle ranching, and then during the day, I put on my other hat and work in U.S. China relations. And I can tell you, it's definitely possible to do both, and I would encourage anyone interested to take part in that. So yeah, look, I'm really excited to hear your questions today. I have seen, I think, drafts of some of them, but I'd really like to just turn it over to you guys and hear what you want to talk about in this session. I think everyone had a chance to maybe listen to a podcast that I did earlier this year. I'd be happy to answer questions regarding that or update on any of those topics. And if anyone was able to catch our recent event where our president and CEO, David Firestein, actually did a roundtable that I think was a really informative event. I was there listening in, and I think those are some of the topics maybe we could talk about as well. I'd be happy to discuss, or anything that's on your mind.
Okay, without further ado, anyone want to jump ahead?
I can start. This is just kind of a general question, but how'd you really get into learning Chinese? And what was that process like for you?
Okay, yeah, and is that Claire I'm sitting there? I'm just trying to make
Yes. Yeah, hi.
Hi, Claire. Yes. So my journey to Chinese actually started when I went from here, this ranch, where it's in a small town, about 811 people, and I really just I didn't feel like I was getting a great education at the public school. My mom was a teacher there, so she knew that. And so it happened. There was a school in Austin where I could go and board at the school and live at the school. It was an international school, and they had a Chinese program. And when I signed up, went in, and the Chinese program was for freshmen in high school, and I was an eighth grader, and I didn't think to ask if I could take it. Well, my best friend, it turns out, asked, and he started taking Chinese. That first year I was taking Spanish, and I grew up in South Texas. I knew Spanish. I wasn't really that interested in just taking the language, but I was fascinated by what my best friend was learning. And so I essentially that year just started studying along with him and trying to learn it, and butchering it completely. I mean, I had no familiarity with Chinese at all. It was just completely different, but that's what attracted me to it. And so starting the next year, I selected Chinese. The freshman year of high school was my first Chinese class, and I got the opportunity to go to China. Actually, that year, there was a kind of spring break trip that I had the opportunity to go to China, and it wasn't until I went there that I realized, like, oh, okay, this is real. This is really cool. Like, I want to do this. Like, I want to learn Chinese for real, not just just for something interesting. And I knew I wanted to go back to China, and so my teacher recognized kind of the spark of my eyes when I came back from that trip, and she recommended a program that my school had somewhat of a relationship with, and the senior class member, there was a senior who had done this program before that I was my model, had done it, and and so I talked to him about it, and then I ended up going to China for a whole year of high school, and and I lived in a Chinese host family. Didn't speak a lick of English, and it was just baptism by fire. And try, and I came back and just as excited as when I had left. And so then I went through college, and I could spend a little more time on that if y'all are interested in it, but that's just how I got started. It was purely this looks really interesting. I don't know anything about it. The one aspect that I would say is the writing, like the characters. I thought that was really cool. Like, I just thought, like, what is, like, no letters, or anything, like a whole character is a word, and are these really drawings? All those questions to me were just fascinating. So, but I'm understanding that y'all, that this is a Chinese class. Y'all are all learning Chinese. So why for you, Claire, maybe even, or others, if you want to share your thoughts on why Chinese?
Well, I actually have kind of a similar experience. I took Chinese in high school, and I got the opportunity to go on a trip to China, and so kind of similar to you. It just, what?
Where did you go?
We went to Shanghai, Beijing, Nanjing, and Suzhou.
Wow.
So it was very cool. And so kind of like you said, I was very just fascinated by the culture and the language there.
Yeah. Have others on this call been to China yet? Had chances to go?
I'm personally planning on going next year.
Okay.
Like as like in Shanghai, I think. And there's only just been a change of plans. So I just wonder, like, how I'm assuming you've been there as well.
You're breaking up.
I think my internet is a little wonky right now. Hopefully I can get right now. Like, have you ever been to Shanghai before?
I have, but it actually took me about 10 years to end up going to Shanghai. And it was actually, it's funny enough, I went to many different cities, Beijing, Tianjin. I lived in different cities, but I hadn't been to Shanghai until I went with a delegation from San Antonio, Texas. Their vice mayor going over there took a trade delegation, and I got to say, Shanghai is an amazing city. I think, if any of you have been there, exactly what I'm talking about, and I highly encourage it. I mean, it really is something out of this world. Not just because it's in China, it just as a city in and of itself. It's quite amazing. But that sounds exciting.
What were the two cities that you've been to in China that you would say were culturally like the most different, like two ends of the spectrum, kind of?
Different from each other?
Each other, yeah.
Ooh, that's hard. So China, though as a country, it is very much from a historical and even linguistical background. Many different countries, many different states, many different peoples. And so it's hard to say exactly who's the most different from each other, but I can tell you, I can describe in general. So you probably are learning Mandarin, which is the official language of China. And it's official because the government decided that that's the official dialect. After the People's Republic was founded, they had to get together and figure out, okay, which dialect is going to be the official dialect. funny enough, Chairman Mao, Deng Xiaoping, none of these guys spoke Mandarin. If you listen to their transcripts, I have a hard time understanding them because traditionally China really, each place, not just each province, but like sections in the province have very different linguistic backgrounds, a lot of common cultural backgrounds, but a lot of diversity. And that's both within the majority Han Chinese populations as well as within the ethnic minorities that exist. Within some of the ethnic minorities that speak dialects actually could be classified as their own language, completely separate, different writing systems. And so I'll give you an example. When I was going to China, actually, when I was a junior in high school, I was in Beijing, so I was learning Mandarin. We took the National Day holiday, which is a week-long or 10-day holiday or so, 3 days on a train from Beijing down to, I think it was, we ended up going to Zhejiang province and down the south. And I thought my Chinese was already pretty good. And I got there, couldn't understand a lick of what they're saying. Y'all know some Chinese, so you say 吃饭, 吃饭, they say 吃饭. And so they're telling me 吃饭, 吃饭, 吃饭. I'm like, 吃饭, 吃饭, what is that? They do not pronounce ch, they just don't pronounce it. Sound doesn't exist. So my wife is from Sichuan, China, and she's actually from Chongqing, and they don't differentiate at all between L's and N's. So le and ne, exactly the same. Well, her English teacher decided to give her the name Luna when we first met. That's a cruel joke. No, I don't think it was a cruel joke, but yeah, couldn't L and N Luna, and even in Chinese, she had to in college kind of figure out, because we were in Beijing, figure out how to like I went back and forth and figured it out, and she speaks great Mandarin, but it was just these are different things you'll find out throughout the country, just linguistically, but historically, looking back through China, South China, North China, the West, Tibet, Xinjiang. Xinjiang, if you know what the words means, actually means new territory. Now, new is a couple hundred years new, but it's so just in the naming of it, you can see there's Inner Mongolia, or where they have strong Mongolian tradition. So I can't say two are completely different. I can't say there are two that are the most different. But I can tell you it's great diversity of cultures and a lot to learn. You'll never stop learning about it if you start down this path. Did I answer your question, Jenna? I hope so.
Good questions.
So
Gabe?
Gabe.
So speaking to like Chinese U.S. relations now.
Yeah.
Look at like the trajectory that we're on right now with our relations to China. Do you think that was predictable like 10 years ago? If you would have looked at U.S. China relations then and like been like, 10 years from now, I'm not surprised that this is what it looks like now. Yeah,
absolutely not. I don't think so. 10 years ago, specifically 10 years ago, so going back to 2010, if you think about it, we were just after the Beijing Olympics. And the Beijing Olympics, not just on the global stage, was a turning point for China and its kind of coming out party representation. Internally within China, there was a huge change. And part of it was that now you had, after going through this event where there were so many eyes on China, foreign eyes coming in, people, stars and people visiting Beijing and Shanghai and Qingdao and all these different cities, they really embraced a lot of reforms that previously were just frustrating local leaders in terms of environment, in terms of cleaning up cities and moving factories away from populated areas. And so China itself was changing in that way. And there was a huge amount of optimism. So I went to China first in 2008. And so I didn't actually get the benefit of what my professors and my American professors would tell me is they used to count the days with blue sky in Beijing. Like literally they count, and they could count, on their hand how many days a year there was a blue sky. Well, I went there and there was blue sky most of the year except for winter. I mean, it really was a complete difference in that optimism. And so why am I focusing so much on internally in China is because that level of optimism, when I came back to the US, was present in the US. People were going to China in droves. Businesses were setting up in China. They were committing harder than ever to doing business with China. And the reforms that were taking place internally in China were also starting to take place on trade and on investment. And there was a lot of optimism around getting China, which now was in the eye, as they projected, this really great nation with these great cities and these great companies to go out into the world. And so in 2013, there was the 走出去 policy under Xi Jinping. One of his first real big policies was going out, so walking out, 走出去. And that right there, here in the US, created a lot of buzz around China bringing money to invest here in the US and creating jobs here in the US. And that was something that was essentially seen as a fulfillment of a promise, kind of a implicit promise that happened, that was around during the Bush administration and into the Carter administration when we normalized relations. It was that, okay, this is going to be good for the US economy. And it actually happened. Billions of dollars flowed in and investments started, and things were largely very positive. And the sharp deterioration around this, to be honest, did not occur, did not really hit until late 2015, 2016. And I don't put it all on the Trump administration. If you look in the trade, you look on the actual trade reports, you'll see that there was recommendations from the Obama administration on their kind of final report of 2015 that said we need to be stricter in terms of non-WTO type enforcement. Now, President Trump came to the same conclusion, but he took a different tact that I just really, unless you took him literally in terms of his campaign, which most people didn't, I certainly didn't, would not have been able to foresee. And so we're now in an area where, don't even ask me about 10 years ago, is there anything that I could foresee for tomorrow or for the next day? It's very, very difficult because the dynamic has shifted.
Thank you.
So I have a question based off of that.
Sure.
If Trump is reelected, how do you think that will affect our relations with China in the future?
Yeah, it's a great question. And it's a common question people are asking right now. There's a couple aspects of a Trump reelection that I think are important. First of all, the Biden campaign has made it clear, and President Biden himself, that should he be elected, he would remove the tariffs that were put into place. And so I feel pretty strongly, given President Trump's strong endorsement of his tariff policy, that he will continue to utilize that tool. Though it can be seen through Trump administration data that tool has largely been ineffective and has actually caused the reverse of what was intended. There does seem to be a very strong commitment to utilizing that. So I think the tariff policies would continue as something that President Trump would want to believes in, I guess, from almost a religious level. Not necessarily that data shows that it's working, because it doesn't, and his own data shows that it's not. But I think it's almost at a level of commitment that that would stay there. It's part of the Trump ideology. Otherwise, I don't feel very strong that the Biden campaign would come out this early and say that they would remove those tariffs. I think that's the smart thing to do, no doubt. But if it's a campaign issue, then definitely I think he's going to dig in on that. Now, I would advise him not to. The other thing that I would say that I think is going to most likely occur, I think the relationship will deteriorate as it is even faster. I think the current level of deterioration shows an exponential downward trend. So previously, I think the damage, quote unquote, that the adversarial stance that the administration took in the early parts of its early stages had some very negative effects, but most of it was, quote unquote, repairable or could be worked through. There was a feeling of honest intent to solve problems. And with the rhetoric around COVID, that is oftentimes not only xenophobic, but also to a great extent, I would call racist, and the labeling of a virus against all U.S. standards, all WHO standards, utilizing China virus and saying that the Chinese have unleashed a plague on the U.S. I think those are statements that have been repeated and are very difficult to come back from. And so as long as President Trump remains in office, I think there's very little room for him to have any positive impact on U.S.-China relations. And that is not due to China, to any unwillingness on China's part. I think it really is just the direct results of the actions that President Trump has taken and his administration has taken, and specifically the rhetoric and the intent that they've created. They've, in a sense, I would sum it up as painted themselves into a corner. And by all means, should he be reelected, we will do everything in our power to help get us out of that corner, get the U.S. out of that corner. But I think it'll be much more difficult given the background. So.
Ethan.
Yes.
Ethan asked a really good question in class, and I wonder if you have a more constructive response to his question.
I'll do my best.
I think the question I have is, with everything being on such an international level and such a, high up, position, I think, is, in your opinion, voting the best way to counter bad policy, or are there other tools in our arsenal?
Yeah, I would have a hard time identifying the best way. What is the best way? I think there are a lot of effective things that can be done and good things that can be done. I think voting is an important and a very important step towards, or not even a step, but it's a very important action to take in all realms of policy. If if the U.S.-China relationship is important to you, as I think it should be, then this election is important by the transient property. And so, voting, casting your ballot looking at the U.S.-China relationship, I think is important for everyone, and seeing how that's going to affect you and what may occur. Otherwise, I wouldn't be talking about it day in, day out, right? Now, there are a lot of other things that you can and should do beyond elections. I think elections are pivotal in order to get the right people in place to be able to affect the right policies. But even the right people may not have the right policies. And to be honest, the right policies are very difficult to find. We consider ourselves part think tank, and we think we're pretty smart. But to be honest, the best policies come from you. They come from people not necessarily in the in the space day in, day out. We look at these issues, we think about them, we work on them, we talk with people about them. But at the end of the day, oftentimes I find the most insight coming from people who are addressing this with fresh eyes and who are taking into account things outside of the U.S.-China relationship that I may not have thought about. So with that in mind, I would say, to affect change on U.S.-China relations, it's about getting involved in the conversation, no matter your background, no matter what your quote unquote expertise is. And really, for the longest time, there has not been really good forums or really good areas for people to talk about U.S.-China relations issues. And this is one thing that that I actually give President Trump quite a bit of credit for as a general matter. He saw a real willingness or a quote unquote market for discussion about China and China's role for Americans, and the importance of China, or what the relationship should look like, what it does look like, what it means for you. And he actually, to a large extent, brought that discussion into the public realm and to people who had previously really been left out of this conversation. And that's sad. There's a lot of great conversations, a lot of great events that go on. There's a lot of great programming that goes on in New York, in DC, in Los Angeles, in the West Coast, about what does U.S.-China relations mean for you. But the problem is no one really talking in the heartland. And, that's something, there's no one really talking to people who aren't experts in U.S.-China relations. It really became, to a large degree, a kind of an echo chamber of people talking to people about the same stuff they said yesterday. And, that is a disservice, I think, just to the American public in general. And so, this is now, I am blessed and am cursed that China and the U.S.-China relationship is such a hot button issue. It means that we get to have great conversations, but it also means that it also means we have a responsibility. And so, though I give President Trump credit for this, there are many areas where I really do disagree on the policy that he's prescribing, the conclusions that he's drawing, the assumptions that he's making. But I'm happy to have those conversations, right? And you guys being here today and just having the conversation with others, regardless of where you stand on it, regardless of whether you agree with me or agree with President Trump or anyone, just having that conversation, I think is already a big step forward, because we weren't doing that. And I think that is one of those things where Gabriel's question really comes in, is that, we were talking about the business aspects of things, but we really weren't talking to, I would say, kind of the common man, the worker, the person who is not doing business with China. No one was engaging them with China. And I think they have a lot of great thoughts and a lot of insight that we should be including in our policy. And unfortunately, for my sake, I say unfortunately, I think President Trump has captured a lot of that market and has weaved a narrative that I strongly disagree with in terms of the adversarial nature of the U.S.-China relationship.
Robbin, I think it's a follow-up on Ethan's question. So since there aren't many good forums for us to follow the U.S.-China relations, can you give us, so what would you suggest as the go-to tool so we can stay up to date and then to continue this conversation within our groups, with others?
Yeah, absolutely, Dr. Ryan. And just to make it very clear, there haven't been traditionally. Our goal is the Bush China Foundation is to create this space, and we can't do it alone. And we don't. We work with partners. We work with those that are traditionally in this, such as the U.S. China Business Council, the American Chamber of Commerce, But we also work with many other stakeholders, such as the American Farm Bureau. I mean, this, you know, earlier this year, I was down in Austin, Texas, when President Trump came to speak at the American Farm Bureau Federation. We work with farm bureaus across the nation. We work with economic development corporations and things of this nature to try to create that space. And, you know, in terms of, I mean, I think, Dr. Strong, this right here is a great example of you creating that space for your students to be able to think about this critically. And I would encourage and be open to, you know, if there are other collaborations or if there are things that you guys are thinking about doing or wanting to do, you know, of reaching out and seeing if there's ways that that either our foundation can work with you or other partners in your college. You know, at the end of the day, our team can only do so much. We can only do so much. But when we have the power of, you know, students like yourself organizing, you know, a lot more can get done. And the last thing I would say is, you know, if you're interested in this, stay tuned in, and I can help, and Dr. Chuang can help guide you to some resources. One place, our website is bushchinafoundation.org, and we do have an events page there where we share the events that we do and that we're a part of. And it also on our LinkedIn as well as our Twitter, we do help cross promote some other events and some other organizations that are doing events, you know, on various issues. And so, you know, I think it's out there. I think there are things out there. And one opportunity that you have right now that may not have even been present last year is that so many of these events and this content is now, these dialogues are happening online. And so you don't necessarily have to get up and, you know, fly out to Chicago or fly to DC or New York to be a part of the conversation. Just by plugging in, just by sending email to the host, just by, you know, signing up, you can take part. But yeah, so, you know, those are the areas I would say. Definitely, you know, look at our events as she's shown right here. And if there are topics that you're interested in, please feel to reach out to us and we can help, you know, recommend things. We get lots and lots of other organizations events as well, maybe areas we're not doing programming that we can even help you connect with.
And there's also an internship opportunity just for each student from different fields of studies. I have engineer, I have nursing students, I have student in theater, I have student in computer science and chemistry. So
yes, yeah, and the current opportunity that's open right now, where it's open, it's a kind of rolling admissions, if we can put it that way, so you can apply anytime. But we'll also update those, and they'll be posted there on our website. Dr. Chong can help you navigate to that, and as well as on LinkedIn and other places. And please, you know, anyone who's interested, please feel free to apply. The information is there, and reach out to myself as well as Ms. Zoe Liang is the director of that, and she'll be able to give you any more information if you're interested in that.
Kaylee?
All right. My question is a little random, but I thought I would ask for your opinion on it. I saw that you have a background in like geoscience and environmental management, and I know that you're from Texas, which is like really big on oil. And this election year there's been like a lot of talk about renewable energy and like green jobs and stuff like that. So I was wondering if you think are investing in those things, like, do you think that will help or hinder our economy?
Investing specifically in what? I just want to make sure I get the.
More like more renewable energy sources and like green jobs and stuff like that.
Yeah. For the sake of simplicity, when you talk about investment, there's two types as a country and as a society we can really think about. One is, we invest in specifically in renewables. Our government has, and so therefore us, the taxpayer, has chosen to invest in those technologies, the development of those technologies, as well as those projects for well over 2 decades now, and maybe even further back. And that's a long tradition, I would say, of public sector investment into these types of infrastructure developments, these types of basic technologies that goes, well back into, into the early part of the 20th century, as we were really establishing our universities, our state universities, and throughout the 2 wars, and then coming into the 50s, that period of time. And so I do think we should continue that public sector investment. And in the last 2 decades, what we've seen is really also a transition towards putting into place policy frameworks that allow for private sector investors to more easily invest in these kind of higher risk projects that have positive externalities for society as a whole. And so traditionally we did that through tax incentives. And so if you're willing to, put venture money into certain projects, then you can get greater tax benefits, and those have worked great. But what we've seen globally is, if we compare to other countries such as China, such as Denmark, such as others, that a public-private partnership type model is similar to they do in China, and they're going from all public to trying to do public-private. That's the area that I would advocate for the U.S. to really, be looking strongly into, is how to leverage that public-private model. And in doing so, one thing that I think in terms of China specifically is we currently, and it's not just China, it's all foreign capital. We currently have, as of 2018, when we passed FIRMA, which is the Federal Investment Risk Review Modernization Act, that is an update of an act called CFIUS, or the Committee on U.S. Foreign Investment. And so that actually narrowed greatly the ability for foreign capital to go into greenfield projects, including in renewables and energy sector. And what it's done, I think, is a disservice to our economic development, in that a lot of the capital that we need to be able to develop renewables, along with the traditional energy, cannot get into the US anymore. And it's based on the policy of economic security is national security. And so specifically with regards to China, as I was talking earlier, in 2013, starting there was really a flood of Chinese money into these technologies, into these projects that help drive that innovation, help drive that next level. And it was much more, it was that policy framework environment that I was explaining. It wasn't necessarily a tax benefit they were looking for. It was the idea they was taking the kind of Chinese model of public-private partnership. This has a framework. Let's put money in it. It doesn't need to make money right now, but long-term be stable and good for the growth. And then the idea is that learning those U.S. technologies and best practices, we can better develop China in responsible ways. That has largely just been cut off. And apart from energy, I will give you an example where this is maybe even hits home more. In the biomedical field, prior to FIRMA's passage, about 90% of all of the funding that went into cancer research to get pre-development cancer drugs to the development stage, essentially from, you and I have great expertise. We can figure it out. We know what we're doing. We're not business people. We're scientists. and we found something and we may be able to solve, find a cure for cancer, but we can't necessarily get it to the Pfizers yet because they're not interested. They want a company, they want to make money. That bridge capital was coming out of China, largely coming out of China, and was able to greatly advance our cancer research. Pharma has cut that almost to zero. And so the policies that are in place, not only for the economy, are causing detriment, but they're for people's lives. I mean, these are policies that are almost, in a sense, pro-cancer. They are they're anti-economic development. They're really hindering that. And so long term, I think we should be investing, but I think we should be doing it in this model of creating policy frameworks that allow for markets to invest. And I'll just leave you with this. Just yesterday, we conducted the second of 2 focus groups we're doing, and we're continuing to work on a policy framework that we call the U.S. China Energy Free Trade and Investment Agreement. And that's a framework that our foundation came up with and is one of our flagship policy frameworks. And you can read a little bit about it on our website, but that's something that I would say is the model that I would advocate for, creating these agreements, these bilateral agreements that allow for the free flow of capital into there on market basis and don't cause impediments. I hope that answers your question.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, I'd be interested if you have any thoughts on that issue as well. In terms of energy and renewables and where China may fit in.
Anyone else? Anaya?
Yeah, so I have a bit of a hypothetical.
Sure.
You were talking about there a lot of recent policies have sort of deteriorated the relationship between U.S. and China. Is there any any specific policy that you would either change or a new policy that you would implement, which might better these relations?
Yeah, well, I think one policy that I would change and I would actually eliminate is first of all, it's the concept of economic security is national security. And I believe that is an overreaching definition of national security. And I would advocate to have for Congress to repeal or fix the law that allows for that, and the Section 301 that allows for the president to unilaterally instate tariffs on goods and services from countries without any input or approval or oversight from Congress. Given that Congress is named in the Constitution as the body that is responsible for levying tariffs. Now, that is the very deep root of the issue, and that is the foundation upon which the tariff policy has been put in place. I would call the Trump tariffs or the Trump taxes that he's put in place. I would also advocate that those be removed, not because it would make better U.S.-China relations, which I think it would. It would improve U.S.-China relations significantly, but because I believe that would largely be in the benefit of the U.S. I believe the tariff policy that has been put in, and the regime that has been put into place on China is actually on China in name only. In reality, it's being borne out by Americans having to pay $1,500 a year more for the goods that they're buying at Walmart and Target and H-E-B and other places. And it also hurts the U.S. shareholder of companies that that have spent billions upon billions, hundreds of billions of dollars investing in infrastructure and supply chains in China to be able to employ Americans because all of our engineers are over here, all of our our really high paying jobs are here. And so by putting those barriers in place, it hurts them. And so, yes, it would, I think, it would go a very long way into improving U.S.-China relations. But I would advocate for it more on the basis, much more, almost solely on the basis that it would be better for the U.S. to have lower trade barriers and to not be taxing the U.S. Consumer and hurting the U.S. shareholder.
Thank you.
Yes. Yeah. Thanks for your question. That's a good one.
Jared?
So with everything going on today, do you think we should view China, the U.S. government should view China as a threat, or more like, I'm not sure, as like an ally, or, I mean, if you know what I mean?
I do. I think
with all the tension going on today. So
yeah. It's a real fundamental question: is what is China to the U.S. and what is U.S. to China, right? And I feel strongly, as our president and CEO does, as the consensus among those who've worked in this area for very long, that China is the most formidable competitor that the U.S. has ever had and ever will have. China is the most formidable competitor that the U.S. has ever had and ever will have. I do not believe that China is the enemy of the U.S., and I do not believe that China sees the U.S. as its enemy. We are competitors, and we are not allies. That is for sure. And there are areas upon which the Chinese take issue with things the U.S. does, and the U.S. takes issue with things China does. And there are policies and stances that we see as problematic from them, and they see as problematic from us. And I think some of those are very close to irrevocable. I think the issues surrounding, for example, Taiwan, are not easily resolved and will exist for a very long time, and will be something that will be a constant source of tension, but does not and has not for the 40 years that we've had normalized relations escalate to, or need to escalate into, a greater conflict. Though I think it will always exist as a tension. Now, on the basis of that, I think there are natural complementarities between the U.S., both in terms of economies, as well as in terms of culture. Many people may disagree, but I will argue it to the end of my day, especially, and I can go more into it, but on economy, on culture, and in terms of global governance, that the U.S. and China can and should work on. And as President Bush said in one of actually in a statement that he wrote, he said his vision for the U.S. and China relationship is that these two powerful nations continue to work together in full friendship and full partnership for the benefit of both nations and the world. And I think it's really showing that his vision is, not just that we're doing this for us, but seeing a greater responsibility that as two really great nations, and I think that both nations are great, that there's a responsibility for the world that there is some type of functional relationship going on, or else we're not just hurting ourselves, but we're hurting, the 7 billion people that inhabit this earth. So.
Appreciate it.
Because I'm from Taiwan, I still have immediate families, like my parents, my sisters, my close family are still in Taiwan, and grow up in Taiwan. It's really hard for us to choose between China and the United States. So I appreciate that you're saying, from a small island or small country perspective, we really hope to see these two powerful nations to work together instead of making us to pick a side. and then to switch aside all the time, it create a lot of uncertainties and anxieties.
That's right.
Yeah. So I was hoping that U.S. and China, even though both cultures, governing systems are so different, but you can find a common ground to work with.
Yeah. I think you have to. And one of the other points that I often make is that sometimes it's not though they're different, it's because they're different that you have to find a common ground.
Yes.
And the diversity of governance models, the diversity of culture, diversity of language, diversity of people and thought, I think is good for us to have. We need, if everyone was exactly like us, like the US, I think then the whole world would have the problems that we have, and we definitely have problems. But if the world was all like China, then we'd have the problems there. And there are things that China does, things that they're able to accomplish, and ways that their governance model outperforms in certain sectors, in certain areas, the US governance model. Now, that's not to say I'm advocating for the Chinese governance model. It's saying, acknowledging that there is some things that they do right, and there's a cost to that. And in the US, there are things that we get right, and there's a cost to it. And just being honest and having that conversation, I think is something that is oftentimes lost in our current public discourse. But I think you, Dr. Sean, is really are leading a great conversation in terms of being able to point out that it's okay to be different, and not just okay, but we should encourage it.
Okay, I know the time's up, so if you want to stay and continue the conversation with me and Robbin, you're more than welcome to stay, but I also know you have a schedule to run to. I do ask you to write a short, concise reflection on Robbin's visit today. It's due by 9 p.m. tonight. Just make sure you post your reflection, and I will see you Monday. Have a good weekend.
Thank you, everyone.
周末快乐啊.
Thank you.
Thank you.
周末愉快啊.
Okay.
It's done. What do you think?
I actually think this one is a lot better. Don't you think?
Man, I'm just so blown away. I'm impressed.